Well, I'm sure if you are like most people, it is not uncommon for your family table, for your dining room table, to be the place where things accumulate. For example, you might, if we were to all of a sudden leave here and say, okay, we're going to stop by each of your houses, and we're going to look at what your dining room table is going to look like. Some of you are going to be a little stressed because, there's going to be all these bills piled up, because that's where the bills are. Or maybe that's where the junk mail comes before, it gets to the trash. You walk in, and you've got, all those wonderful ads that come in, about, restaurants and get ready for it because we're getting ready for election season. And it's like going to be like every other day. You're going to have somebody putting something in your mailbox or whatever. And maybe the dining room table is where that accumulates. Maybe it's where your kids do their homework, and so you've got like papers and book bags and everything else like just all over the place. I know when I took my first job right out of college, I was a youth pastor up in Bay City, Michigan, and I lived by myself. And the way my apartment was situated was my dining room table or my family table was right next to the washer and dryer. And so being single, I didn't eat at the dining room table very much. I kind of ate in the living room area. And so my dining room table naturally became the place where clean clothes went after they came out of the dryer, because it was right there and it was so convenient. I didn't need to fold the shirts. I could just lay them out on the dining room table. Now, when Aaron would come up and visit every now and then, I would have to clean that because that doesn't project well. And I don't do that anymore. So if you come over to our dining room or our house, I don't put the laundry on the dining room table anymore. But that's just what happened. It became the place where everything goes. And if we're not careful, if you're like me when I was single, the clutter on the dining room table or on the family table can get so piled up, and we can amass so much that we lose the purpose behind the dining room table. Now, you may be thinking, well, it still serves its purpose. Yes, my family table is the place that the bills are kept. It is the place where junk mail is stored before I throw it away. It is the place, maybe you're like me, and it was where your laundry was, piled up. And we may argue that it's still useful, but the original design behind it has gotten lost. You can't sit down and use it for what it was originally intended to be used for. This morning, as we continue our family table series, we were in week 4. And if you kind of remember, week 1 started with this idea that a family table has to begin with a table of one. And that we either have to be healthy or we have to be trending in that way before we can have a healthy family and a healthy marriage. Then we took a look at the second week of being intentional. And being intentional about what we teach them and how we train them and what we model for them, and then telling them who they are when it comes to our children. Last week, we took a look at this idea of the mess that happens on the table. And what do we do when messes happen? If you kind of remember, we talked about this balance between discipline and grace. And how there are times in life where we do need to discipline. And there are times when we need to be disciplined. But at the same time, God does it with grace and God does it with mercy. This week, we're dealing with the clutter on the table. And what do we do and how do we make sure that the purpose remains the same? As always, if you kind of want a spot to take notes, there's 2 ways to do it. One is on the back of your bulletin. If you prefer to write, there's a spot there that you can take notes. Or if you prefer the electronic version, if you open up the YouVersion Bible app, under the events section, look for the Rock Church, and you'll find all the notes, all the scripture that we have, as well as a couple of devotional plans that will kind of help you take what we're going to talk about this morning and go a little deeper. So I encourage you to be part of that. But before we go any further, let's stop and ask God to speak to us. Heavenly Father, this morning we thank you for who you are, and Father, for the message that you've already given us this morning through worship. And now you have something to say to us as we look at your word. And so I ask this morning that you speak to us. That, Father, you remove anything that might get in the way. You remove any distractions, remove any worries. And, Father, may we just hear your voice, and may we focus on you. God, this morning there's something that you want to do. There's a message that you want to say to us. And so, Father, may we have ears to hear it. And, God, be with us. And we ask all this in your name. Amen. To start with, as we deal with this clutter, and we deal with the idea that clutter can sometimes stop the original purpose of the family table from happening, I think we need to just take a moment and remind ourselves what the original purpose of the family table is. And it's found in Deuteronomy 6. This is the theme verse that we're using all the way through the series, but this is what Moses writes. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. And if you kind of remember, we started off by saying the purpose of the family, the family is the primary environment where we learn to love God with all that we are. Now, everything else that flows out of that, if you kind of remember, there's a lot of things that we talked about as why people have families and the purpose behind it, but everything flows out of that one command. It's what Jesus in the New Testament calls the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. He's repeating what we find here in Deuteronomy 6. And so the purpose of the family is to be that environment where that takes place. Where we teach our kids what it means to love God. Where we teach our kids what it means to obey. When we teach our kids what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. All of those things. And so that's what keeps getting cluttered. And that's what, if we're not careful with, we have to protect. It's this idea of, okay, I have to stop things from getting in the way of that. But there are things. There are things that get in the way that have the potential to clutter that original purpose. And there are 4 of them that we're going to kind of focus on this morning. The first area is kind of the words that come out of our mouth. And the first area of clutter that we have to be aware of, that we have to protect ourselves from, is unhealthy talk. And at the outset, we all know the power that words can have in our lives. I mean, we've all probably experienced the lie that we tell our kids a little bit, because we've all said this to them, maybe at some point when they're growing up, and they come home and they said, Sally said this about me, or Jimmy said this to me on the bus, and we've all told them, well, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me, that type of thing. And we all know that is the biggest lie that there is, okay? We all know that because we've all been hurt by words. We understand that words have power. It's kind of one of the things in today's culture, maybe words have a little too much power in some regards, but we understand that words have power. And it's not just something that we've learned recently. This is not something that's like, we just discovered in the last, 20 years or whatever. This was around when Paul was around, because in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, listen to what Paul says when it comes to our words. He says this, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of our mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And when it comes to this unhealthy talk, I think there are 2 different aspects that we kind of need to explore when it comes to this clutter. The first and the most obvious is it's the words that we actually use. We need to be aware of the words that we use when we speak to and about our family. Because as we've already touched on, the words that we use have power. The words that we use carry weight. I'm amazed, and I'm a little bit perplexed sometimes too. If I've been around someone, and I've just maybe gotten to know them a little bit, and you may have this, and maybe you found this in your own life too. When they find out, eventually the conversation will come along the time is, what do you do? And I'll tell them I'm a pastor, and usually this is in environments outside of the church setting. And after a while, we'll be spending some time together. And inevitably, at some point in our kind of the getting to know, they'll look at me and we'll be having this conversation and they'll say, I know what I'm about to say is, I apologize for what I'm about to say. And I'm always kind of like, well, what are you apologizing for? And they're like, I know you probably don't talk like this, but I'm going to say something and I just need to apologize beforehand. And then they go ahead and say it. And usually I tell them, I'm not offended by the language that you use. It's just me personally. You can use whatever language that you want. That's up to you. You're not going to offend me. But what amazes me is this idea that they apologize to me beforehand, but then they still go through and they use it. I know they're like, you might be offended by what I'm about to say. I'm like, okay, if I'm offended, then if you think I might be offended, then why you go ahead and say it? And we do this, and usually what it is, it's a string of 4-letter words or 5-letter words, or a string of profanity, and they're just like, what? Here's what it is, and that's just the way I am. And I'm not bothered by it personally. It's just that interesting desire to apologize ahead of time because they think I might find their language inappropriate. And you may think I'm getting on a soapbox here, and if I am, it's my soapbox, and it's my stage right now, so that's what I get to say. Here's the thing. Me personally, and I think it falls in line with what Scripture has, and we can have this conversation later on if you want, but I think profanity and swearing really have no place, not only in the life of a family, okay? Not just in the life of a family. I don't think parents, you need to be cussing at your kids. Kids, you don't need to be cussing at your mom and dad. It doesn't need to be a part of the family. But not only does it not need to be a part of the family, I don't think it's consistent with what we call a relationship with Christ. Because it's interesting, and I've seen this, and I've seen it happen in society. I've been around people who are not Christians, and yet there is somebody in a setting that everybody knows is supposedly a Christian, or has that name, carries that title with them, as much as they may or may not be living up to it, whatever. And I've watched as they have let loose on, somebody. And I've heard the crowd go, yeah, and she's a Christian, or he's a Christian. I'm like, oh, so you want to say, we're not all like that. I apologize for, the example that may have been set. And it's usually not a good one to hear. And so when it comes to our families, and when we talk about this idea of unhealthy talk, I think if swearing, if profanity, if that is a part of your family talk, I think it clutters the waters when it comes to this idea of loving God with all that we are. Because if you kind of remember, what does Deuteronomy talk about? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And you think, well, it doesn't say anything in there about the way I talk. I think that's implied. When God said that's everything that you are, love God with me. And sometimes it clutters the table. And so if we're telling our kids, you need to love your God with all that you are, but boy, you are a rotten piece of right now. It's like, okay, wait a minute. We're cluttering the table. We're getting away from the original purpose. And here's the thing. It's not just in the words that we use. And it's not just in the fact of, well, I don't swear to my kids, and so I'm okay. Because you can have unhealthy talk without ever swearing, without ever cussing, without ever doing any of those things. It's in the words that we use, because how many times have maybe we have said it, or we've had it said to us by our parents, if only you could be like so-and-so. If only you could be like your older brother. Now, it's easy for me to say because I am the oldest. I never had that. No one could ever, my mom and dad couldn't say, if only you could be like, your older brother, because I did. I was the oldest. My sister came along, and I don't remember them saying that too much about her, to me. But maybe you've heard this, or you have a friend. If only you could be like so and so, things like that. And we go, but I didn't swear. I didn't have a list of 4-letter words or 5-letter words. It was clean. Because you have the second part of this verse, and I think we focus on the first part so often, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, and we do need to focus on that, and that is important, and it is important when it comes to our families, but we forget the last part of that verse. Did you catch what Paul says? But only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. This isn't just talking about what the pastor says on Sunday morning so that I'm supposed to say something that benefit those who listen. This is how we talk to each other. And let me give you a good example from my own life, all right? Little therapy session here. A couple months ago, I think it was, we were down in Indianapolis, and we were visiting with my cousin and her husband and their daughter, and we were celebrating their birthday, and my family was down there. My sister and her 4 boys, I think, were down there, and my mom and dad, and we were all kind of leaving at the same time, and my parents and my sister and her boys were going to stop at IKEA on the way home. If you kind of know Indianapolis, it sits there right off of I-69. And Aaron and I were like, it's late. We just want to get home. We're going to get home late as it is already. We don't want to stop. But Emma thought that we needed to stop. And Emma thought so much that we needed to stop that if we didn't stop, it was going to cause irreparable damage to a relationship that we have with my mom and dad and my sister and, my nieces, or not my nieces, my sister doesn't have any boys, but my nephews. And so she was adamant that we needed to stop. And from the time we left, and my cousin lives in the Mooresville kind of Greenwood area, and so we went that way. And all the way there, she's like, we need to stop. And Nene wants us to stop. And, Eli is, when he gets older, he's going to remember the time that we didn't stop from, IKEA. And I'm, driving and kind of trying not to laugh, but, and Aaron thinks I engage Emma much too long in discussions. But anyway, we got towards IKEA, and I looked in the back seat, okay, and we're driving, and I said, wave to your cousins as we go by. Now, was that what? I didn't say it, badly. I didn't say it angrily. I didn't say it with any other, four-letter words or whatever. I just said, wave to your cousins as we go by. And, and I think Owen may have snickered a little bit. I may have snickered a little bit. But Emma did not think that was funny. And in no uncertain terms, she let me know that what I said was not appropriate. That what I said was not funny. And she's like, you hate me and all these things, and how could you do that? And I tried to explain it away. But here's the thing. In my own mind, was that healthy? You think, well, it was a little bit funny. It was a little bit of, you're trying to lighten the mood. But was it beneficial? Was what came out of my mouth at that point, did it fit what we see here in Ephesians 4:29, that it may benefit those who listen? In that situation, as much as it was clean, as much as there wasn't anything, a personal attack or anything along that lines, it wasn't appropriate. And so it's not just the things that we say, but it's also the tone or attitude that we say them with as well. Because here's the thing, words spoken in anger are received very differently from the same words spoken gently. You can say the exact same thing, but if you say it with anger or with spite or with sarcasm or with, any of those things, it's received differently. And so it changes the tone of things. And it goes both ways. How many times as kids did we get in trouble? Not for what we said, but for how we said it. Because we as parents, what have we said? Don't use that tone with me. We've not said don't use those words with me, but don't use that tone with me. And I think that's what Paul's talking about here. We need to get away from the clutter. The clutter is unhealthy talk. It's what we say. It's how we say it. And it just clutters the table. We need to be careful of that. And so the first area that we need to get rid of, we need to be conscious of the unhealthy talk that has the potential to clutter the family table. The second thing that has the potential to clutter our family table is dishonor. Later on in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul writes, and if you want to read Ephesians chapter 5 and 6 when it comes to marriage and family relationships, Paul just writes some beautiful words. But in Ephesians chapter 6, he deals with this. He says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. And we get the first part of that verse. We get the first part when it says, children, obey your parents. And we like that. It's the one that all the kids go, I wish that wasn't in there, because that's the out that I need. And it's kind of an interesting take on things, because it is. This is, when you go back to the Ten Commandments, this is the first one that God really begins to expand upon a little bit. And says it's not just do this, don't do this, but there's a promise that comes with it. But then there's that second part in there that Paul talks about, that honor your father and mother. And honor is a concept that we often don't think about, or it's language that we don't often use today. What does it mean to honor someone? We know at school you get on the honor roll, and it's just because if you did, you got a certain grade or GPA, whatever, you get on it. But it's a little strange to think about in today's culture and language when it comes to our family. But to honor simply means to put a high value upon, or to put a high price on. And so we place value upon our family, not just the concept of having family. And so it's not just that when we look at this situation, we look and say, okay, having family is what is honorable. Or it's honorable to have family. But what it means is when you look at the members of your family, you place honor upon them. You place value upon them. And this is a concept that we can extend past the time that we are living in our parents' home. And it mainly concerns around the way that we act. Do our actions reflect well upon our family? Do we bring honor to our family? Because here's the thing, we all carry the name of our family as we go, and things reflect upon our family. Both kids towards their parents and parents towards their kids. And it happens in cultures and in society at large that when sometimes something happens, there's a whole group of people that get lumped with it. I'll give you another good example of this. Not this past week, the week before that. If you watch the news at all, my high school made the local news. For some of you that may know, I went to Homestead High School. Grew up in the Fort Wayne area. And Homestead, a week ago Friday, played Bishop Luers in football. And it was a huge rivalry. They're both up towards the top of their conference. It was one of these games. And then afterwards, on Saturday morning, the news that centered around the football game wasn't actually about the football game. It's about what happened after the football game. And supposedly, there was some damage and some vandalism that was done to the visiting bleachers section. And the visitors at that point was Homestead. We were playing at Bishop Luers. And it was kind of interesting because it came out on social media that there was damage. They thought that they may have set fire to the metal bleachers and all these things. And it was interesting because as you read the comments on Facebook, it didn't just center around like a group of students. It all of a sudden went to the entire high school. And the entire high school is like this. And all the students are like this. And I graduated 2019. So that'd be 25 years ago. Wow, I'm getting old. No, that's like 35 years ago. I don't know. A long time ago. I'm bad at math. That's why I'm a pastor. I don't have to do math. Okay. 25 years ago, I guess it was. Yeah, 25. Okay. And it's been a long time. I haven't been back. I've been back a couple times, but it was this idea, and it lumped in that all Homestead students are like this, and this is what it is. And we fought that when I was in high school, and there was a reputation we had. There was a stereotype that we had. But a few students kind of changed the perception of the entire school. And it was interesting because as news came out, it was like the bleacher company said, that's not a fire because you can't set fire to metal bleachers. He goes, that's like oxidation. And they're like, that we can go back and correct that. But even afterwards, it was like, well, but still, Homestead's still like this. And the students are like this and the alumni is like this and all of these things. And it happens in life because if we act a certain way, all of a sudden it reflects upon our family. It reflects upon, it brings dishonor to their name, or it brings honor to their name, to our name. And we have to realize that this is part of it. And so if we act in a way that brings dishonor to our family, it clutters that table of does it mean to love God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. And here's the thing that we need to grab onto. It's not just when we feel like we are treated with honor or respect. And sometimes we're like that. We're like, well, you don't know about my situation growing up. You don't know how mom and dad treat me. Why should I honor them? Why should I respect them? Because you don't know the words that they say. You don't know the things that they do. I don't need to respect them. I don't need to honor them. Notice here, and I know it's tough, and sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow. But God doesn't say, honor those that treat you with honor. Or respect those only when they respect you first. The commandment is honor your father and mother. It didn't say if they're good parents. It didn't say if they deserve it or they've earned it. We honor because that's how God designed it to be. And so how do we honor them? We act in a way that reflects good and reflects well upon them. We honor them in a way that when people look at our lives, they say, okay, there's something that was done right there, even if it wasn't done right. And I know it's hard. And it's difficult sometimes, but it's the way we're supposed to operate. It's the way we're supposed to be. We're supposed to bring honor. Not be rebellious in our actions. And it can be hard to establish an environment where we learn what it means to love God with all that we are if there's dishonor. And so in the decisions we make and the things that we do, are we honoring our family or are we adding clutter to the table? The third area that can often bring clutter in is selfishness. We have a tendency to be selfish in who we are. There is an innate desire within all of us to put ourselves first. And the reason that this is so tough is because we have been dealing with this from day one. I mean, put two toddlers together in a room, let them play for a little while, and eventually you will see selfishness come out. You don't have to teach this. It's not like math. You have to teach them that 2 + 2 = 4. Or you don't have to teach someone how long has it been since 1994 when they graduated high school. You don't have to do that. It comes, it comes inherent. Selfishness, because eventually they will have something, or the other person will have something that they want, and they want it. And so they're going to take it. We've all seen it. We are taught to look out for ourselves. We want what we want, and to an extent, this mindset can work if we have a table for one. If you are single and you are the only one that is living in your house right now, there's a little bit of selfishness that can, happen. You can go home and you can do exactly what you want because there's no one else around. Okay? You can go home and you can have what you want for dinner. You can go where you want to eat. You can go, do those things. There's a kind of a built-in selfishness that can take place. The problem comes is when you begin to extend that table, when you begin to add any more to that table, that nature, that desire has to change, because now all of a sudden it's not just you, but it's you and someone else. Or it's you and several other people. And when that happens, we've got to begin to take ourselves out of the driver's seat and, okay, it can't be all about what I want or what I need or what I deserve or those type of things. We have to begin to say, okay, what do other people want? And I understand this is going to be hard. It is going to take work. It is not going to be easy, but it's what we need to do. And I think Paul sums it up beautifully in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, he's going to kind of launch into a talk about who Christ was and what he did. But listen to how he kind of begins to intro into that. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And he goes on to say your attitude should be the same as Christ. And he goes on and talks about what Christ has done for us and how that should be the example that we follow. I mean, if you just take this verse for a minute, what would it look like in our families if we really started to live that out? If we really started to live out that, you know what, it's really not, I'm not doing something just for what I can get out of it. And we've all done that in our families, haven't we? When growing up with kids, we know, like, if we took out the trash and we weren't asked to, because we're like, hey, I might want money later on for, I'm going to the football game or I'm going to whatever, and if I do this, maybe mom and dad will give me some money. And so we don't do it out of the kindness of our heart, or we don't do it because we're being nice. We do it because we've got a little bit of a selfish ambition. We're doing this to get something in return. Or maybe we're doing a couple things to say, hey, I'm going to build up some points so that when I want something, I can say, well, I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and didn't you notice all that? And then we can play that card, and we're like, I deserve this. And this is what selfish ambition is. We're doing things only to benefit us. So what happens if we got rid of that and we said, you know what, I'm going to value others above myself. I'm not only going to look to my own interests, but I'm going to look to the interests of others. What would happen if I put my sister's feelings ahead of myself for right now? Some of you that have kids, you'd be like, you need to pay attention to this because, that would cut down the fighting. And it would. But what would that look like if we began to embody this in our families? To say, you know what, I'm going to live this out. And what Paul writes about here is the way that we're going to model our family. And it's going to rid the table of the selfishness. The way that we help around the house, the way that we accommodate our schedules, we're considerate of others. All the things that if we just focus on ourselves seem to fall to the wayside. But if we begin to put the focus on others and we begin to function as a family the way that God desires us to, it begins to reduce the clutter that can encroach upon the family table. And I think it's this beautiful thing that can happen. And all of a sudden it can come back to, and again, what's the purpose? It is to love God with all that we are, with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to begin to model that, begin to teach that, begin to train that. And so what would happen? What would happen if we really begin to live like that? If we got rid of the selfishness from our family table? The fourth area of clutter that can sometimes be there is busyness. And this is a difficult one too. And you're like, man, these are tough. And this is one of the most dangerous of them all because it always seems like there's always something good to be a part of. There's always something that our kids are doing, that the community's doing, that the church is doing. And man, we can get so busy with our lives. We can get so busy, and all of a sudden that busyness clutters the table. And I understand there are going to be seasons of this. And just looking at our past week with our family, from I think probably from Friday of last week maybe until today, I don't know if we've eaten dinner together as a family. Just with my schedule, with some of the things that I've had going on. If you've been aware, it's been homecoming week, and there have just been some things that have happening. And we've not really had the chance to connect well as a family. And I'm not saying that you can't have those seasons. And you can't have those moments when busyness creeps in, and it is. And, we've been doing good things, and it's just we've touched base here and there. But what happens is when the busyness stops the intentionality from happening. It's when not only are you going in a lot of directions and involved in a lot of things, but the issue is where this starts to be a problem is when the clutter starts to have an impact on how intentional we are being with teaching our kids, with training our kids, with modeling for our kids, with all the things that we've already looked at before, with our families. Because of the schedule that we keep on a consistent basis and on any regularity, if we're not able to have those intentional moments, if we're not able to have those moments where we can pour into our families and we can teach them, then it's encroaching and we need to get rid of it. And I know sometimes it means saying no to good things. And sometimes it means saying no to things that are beneficial. And it's not just saying no to bad things. I mean, that should be regardless of whether or not we're busy or not. But sometimes it means sitting down, looking at the schedule and going, you know what, there are things that I just can't be a part of. There are things that as great as they are and as beneficial they are, you know what, it's creeping in and we just have to say no. And so it's making sure that in the midst of all these things, that through the clutter of busyness, through the clutter of everything that's going on, that it doesn't encroach upon our intentionality. It doesn't encroach upon the things that we want to do and the way that we want to teach our kids. And it's within these four areas that we need to be careful. Because if not, you can have a family table that's cluttered. You can have a family table that's cluttered with unhealthy talk. It's cluttered with dishonor. It's cluttered with selfishness. It's cluttered with busyness. And all of a sudden, the purpose of the family table has been lost. Yeah, you still got it. Yeah, you know where it's at. Yeah, you know that, it's over there somewhere. But the purpose of it has been lost. And here's the thing. This doesn't just apply to our families. These areas of clutter, they don't just apply to the things that in our homes. But these are the same four things that can apply to our relationship with Christ. Because there's this beautiful thing that God paints in Scripture, and you see it over and over again. Our earthly families are supposed to model what our heavenly family is like. There's supposed to be that connection that when someone looks at our family and they see what happens, they see the way that we interact with our kids, they see that we interact with our parents, they see that the way that we interact with our siblings, that it reflects the way that God wants us to interact with Him. That there is a correlation there, and our families are supposed to be a model of that. It's an earthly reminder of what God wants us to be like. But at the same time, as much as God says, okay, the reminders that you have are good, the dangers that you have are the same as well. And so the dangers that we have to our earthly families are the same dangers that we can have to our relationship with Christ. When you begin to look at these things, unhealthy talk, guess what? That clutters our relationship with God. Because why? Well, because of Ephesians 4:29. It's not that's not just the way you're supposed to talk to your kids, or that's not just the way you're supposed to talk to other people. God says that's not the way you're supposed to talk. And if you are, it's not just because they received it wrong. It's because that there's something in our hearts that's wrong. Dishonor. If we dishonor people, it's not just giving, our family a bad name, but when we as Christians act in a way that is inappropriate and in a way that is disrespectful, not only does it dishonor our family, but it also dishonors the name of Christ. And so God says, remember, you have to honor me. You have to reflect me. You're representing me. Selfishness has never gotten in anybody's way of following Christ. I mean, that's the last one we have to worry about. We've never wanted our way versus God's way, have we? You're like, okay, that's the easy one. We'll just dismiss that one. Busyness. Busyness has never gotten in the way of someone's relationship with Christ. It's never cluttered the table a little bit because we've always had the time to do our devotions, to spend our time with Him. We've always made time to come to church. We've always made time to do the things that God wants us to do. And so this morning, don't just hear a family talk. Don't just hear, well, that was good. Pastor Matt talked about the family and the clutter of the family table, and, I'll watch my family and I'll make sure that doesn't happen. But also hear the heavenly talk. Hear the relationship with Christ talk. That if you're here this morning and your relationship with Christ, because your table with Him, just the two of you, has been cluttered, God may say, hey, reduce some of that clutter so that I can come in and you can find the purpose behind your relationship with me, because that's what I want. This morning, whether it's your family table, whether it's your relationship with Christ, can we make a decision to get rid of the clutter? To get rid of it, and it may start to pile up on the table. You're like, no, before it gets any more, I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to get rid of it so it doesn't cloud the purpose of the table. It doesn't cloud the purpose of what my family to be. It doesn't cloud the purpose of what I want my relationship with Christ to be. And I'm going to make sure I'm not going to let it happen. Can we do that this morning? And just say, you know what, I'm getting rid of the clutter. Whatever God may say, I'm getting rid of it so there's nothing that will muddy the waters. There's nothing that will hinder the purpose of my relationship with my family or my relationship with Christ. Heavenly Father, this morning we thank you for who you are. And God, in my own life, there are times that clutter comes in, and it's so easy. It's so easy to let it pile up with our families, with our relationship with you. And a lot of times we have excuses. We have good reasons that we can justify it. We can kind of push it off to the side. But Father, sometimes we just need to see it for what it is. It's clutter. And it's stopping the purpose of the family table. It's getting in the way of our relationship with you, and we just need to get rid of it. And so, God, this morning, if there's something here that maybe you've tapped someone on the shoulder and you've kind of tugged on their hearts and said that clutter that he talked about, it's happening in your life, and it's happening in your family, and you need to do something about it. God, may this be the day that we start the spring cleaning. We go home, and with our families and in our relationship with you, we get rid of the clutter, and we say, God, may it be clear. May it be clear of the unhealthy talk. May it be clear of the dishonor. May it be clear of the selfishness. May it be clear of the busyness. And Father, may we as our families be intentional, and may we let nothing get in the way of that. Father, this morning, if it's in our relationship with you, thank you for grace. Thank you for mercy. Thank you for the ability to start today. God, help us. Help us reduce the clutter. And God, may our families and our relationship with you be crystal clear. And may it be a model for the world to how things can be when we trust in you and when we follow you. So, Father, this morning, help us get rid of the clutter. And we ask all this in your name. Amen.